The gunshot that killed Dahlia Kennedy's husband echoed through her memory every night, but it was the whispers of Pahrumph's respectable women that truly haunted her as she stood in the general store 6 months pregnant with nowhere left to turn. She had come to Nevada Territory in 1873 with Thomas Kennedy, full of hope and promises that dissolve faster than morning dew in the desert heat. Thomas had been a gambler, a drinker, and a man who preferred the company of saloon girls to his own wife, but he had been her husband nonetheless. When he was shot down in a dispute over cards 3 months ago, Dahlia thought the worst was behind her. She was wrong. The realization that she carried Thomas's child came just as the landlord informed her that the small room above the seamstress shop would no longer be available to a widow with no means of support. Mrs. Henderson, the seamstress, had made it clear that a woman in Dahlia's condition, without a husband and without prospects, was not the kind of tenant she wanted associated with her establishment. The respectability of her business came first. Dahlia stood at the counter of Morrison's general store, counting out her few remaining coins for a small bag of flour and some dried beans. Her dark hair was pulled back severely from her pale face, and her green eyes were rimmed with the kind of exhaustion that came from too many sleepless nights and too many tears. Her dress, though clean and carefully mended, showed her circumstances plainly. The fabric was worn, the style outdated, and it was already growing tight across her middle, despite her best efforts to let out the seams. "That will be $1.15, Mr. Morrison said, his tone neither kind nor unkind, simply matter of fact. He was a businessman, and business was business. Dahlia counted out the coins carefully. She had exactly $1.20 left to her name after this purchase. 5 cents would not last long, would not get her through another week, let alone provide for a baby. As she gathered her small bundle, she heard the voices behind her. Mrs. Whitmore and Mrs. Davidson, two of Pahrumph's most prominent ladies, were examining bolts of fabric near the window, but their conversation carried clearly across the store. "It is absolutely disgraceful," Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice dripping with disdain. "That Kennedy woman, walking around town in her condition, without a husband, without any shame at all." "I heard she was trying to find work," Mrs. Davidson replied. "Can you imagine? As if any decent household would take in a woman like that. The baby will be just as much a disgrace as the mother." Dahlia's hands trembled as she clutched her package. She wanted to scream at them that Thomas had been her husband, that she had done nothing wrong, that she was a widow through no fault of her own, but she knew it would not matter. In their eyes, she was a burden, a problem, something to be whispered about and shunned. She hurried from the store, her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall until she was alone. The heat of the Nevada afternoon hit her like a physical force as she stepped onto the wooden boardwalk. Pahrump was a small town, surrounded by vast stretches of desert and distant mountains that shimmered in the heat. It was a hard land that bred hard people, and there was little room for compassion when survival itself was a daily struggle. Dahlia made her way to the small boarding house at the edge of town, where she had taken a room after being evicted from the seamstress shop. It was a shabby place, run by a woman named Mrs. Sullivan, who asked no questions as long as the rent was paid on time. But Dahlia's rent was due tomorrow, and she did not have it. She did not have anything. She climbed the narrow stairs to her room, a tiny space with a single bed, a washstand, and a small window that looked out over the empty desert. She set her package on the bed and sank down beside it, finally allowing the tears to come. They flowed hot and bitter, tears of frustration and fear and desperate aching loneliness. "They said my baby is a disgrace," she whispered to the empty room, her hands moving protectively to her swollen belly. "What am I going to do? What am I going to do?" She did not know how long she sat there, crying until she had no tears left, until the sun began to sink toward the horizon and the heat of the day slowly gave way to the cool of evening. Finally, she wiped her face and forced herself to stand. Crying would not solve her problems. She needed a plan, needed to find some way to survive. There was a small church in Pahrump, presided over by Reverend Matthews, an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle manner. Dahlia had attended services there a few times, though she had felt the cold stares of the other parishioners and had stopped going. But perhaps the Reverend could help her. Perhaps he knew of some position, some family that needed a housekeeper or a cook. She was willing to do anything, any kind of work, if it meant she could provide for her child. She tidied her hair and smoothed her dress as best she could. then made her way back down the stairs and out into the cooling evening. The church was only a few blocks away, a simple white building with a small steeple and a hand-painted sign that read, Payrump Community Church. She found Reverend Matthews in the small office behind the sanctuary, writing by lamplight. He looked up as she knocked hesitantly on the open door, and his expression shifted from surprise to something that might have been sympathy. "Mrs. Kennedy," he said, rising from his chair. "Please come in." Dahlia stepped into the office, twisting her hands nervously. "Reverend Matthews, I am sorry to disturb you, but I did not know where else to turn." "You are never a disturbance, my dear," he said gently. "Please, sit down. Tell me what troubles you." She sat in the chair across from his desk and forced herself to meet his eyes. "I need work, Reverend. Any kind of work. I can clean, I can cook, I can sew. I am a hard worker, and I am willing to do whatever is necessary. But I have a baby coming, and I have nowhere to go and no means to support us. I thought perhaps you might know of someone who could use my help." Reverend Matthews sighed heavily and leaned back in his chair. His expression was genuinely pained. "Mrs. Kennedy, I wish I could help you. Truly I do. But I must be honest with you. I have already spoken to several families in the congregation, hoping to find you a position. But they have all refused. The women of this town have made their feelings clear, and their husbands follow their lead. They do not want you in their homes." Dahlia felt her heart sink. "But why? I have done nothing wrong. My husband is dead, yes, but I was married. This baby is legitimate. I know that, my dear, and God knows it too. But people can be cruel, especially when they feel their own respectability is threatened. They see you as a reminder of how quickly circumstances can change, how easily any of them could fall into hardship. It frightens them, and so they push you away." He reached across the desk and patted her hand gently. "I will keep trying, Mrs. Kennedy. I will not give up on you, but I must ask you to be patient." Patience. Dahlia wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. She did not have time for patience. Her baby would be here in 3 months, and she had nowhere to live and no way to feed either of them. She thanked the Reverend and left the church, stepping out into the twilight. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, beautiful and indifferent to her suffering. She walked slowly back toward the boarding house, her mind racing. There had to be something she could do, someone who would help her. As she passed the Silver Spur Saloon, she heard the sound of laughter and music spilling out into the street. She paused, looking at the swinging doors, and for a moment she considered what it would mean to walk through them, to ask the saloon owner for work. She had heard that the girls who worked in saloons could make good money, enough to live on, enough to save. But she also knew what kind of work that would entail, and she could not bring herself to do it. Not yet. Not while there was still any other option. She continued walking, passing the livery stable and the blacksmith shop, both closed for the evening. The town was settling down for the night, and she felt utterly alone in the world. It was then that she saw him. He was standing outside the livery stable, checking the cinch on his horse's saddle. He was tall and lean, with broad shoulders and the weathered look of a man who spent his life outdoors. His hat was pulled low over his face, but she could see the strong line of his jaw and the dark stubble that covered it. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, scuffed boots with spurs that jingled softly as he moved. There was something solid and dependable about him, something that made her think of oak trees and mountains, things that did not bend or break no matter how hard the wind blew. He must have sensed her staring, because he looked up and their eyes met. His eyes were a striking blue, the color of the sky just after dawn, and for a moment they simply looked at each other across the dusty street. Then Dahlia looked away quickly, embarrassed to have been caught staring, and hurried on her way. But she could feel his gaze following her, and something in her chest tightened with an emotion she could not name. The next morning, Dahlia woke to a sharp knock on her door. It was Mrs. Sullivan, the boarding house owner, a large woman with a permanent scowl and a voice like gravel. "Rent is due, Mrs. Kennedy," she said without preamble. $2, same as every week." "I know, Mrs. Sullivan," Dahlia said, pulling her shawl around her shoulders. "I need a few more days. I am looking for work, and as soon as I find something, I will pay you what I owe." "Mrs." Sullivan crossed her arms over her ample chest. "I have heard that before. I run a business here, not a charity. If you cannot pay by tomorrow morning, you will have to leave. I have other people who want this room, people who can actually pay for it." Please, Dahlia said, hating the desperate note in her voice. I have nowhere else to go. That is not my problem, Mrs. Sullivan said flatly. Tomorrow morning, Mrs. Kennedy, not a day later. She turned and walked away, her heavy footsteps echoing on the wooden stairs. Dahlia closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. Tomorrow morning. She had less than 24 hours to find $2, to find some way to keep a roof over her head. And she had no idea how she was going to do it. She spent the morning walking through town, knocking on every door, asking at every business if they needed help. She offered to clean floors, to wash dishes, to do laundry, anything at all. But everywhere she went, the answer was the same. No, we do not need anyone. Try somewhere else. And sometimes, though the words were never spoken, she could see it in their eyes. We do not want someone like you. By midday, she was exhausted and defeated. She sat down on a bench outside the feed store, trying to catch her breath and gather her thoughts. The baby was moving inside her, small flutters that reminded her why she had to keep trying, why she could not give up no matter how hopeless things seemed. Excuse me, madam. Dahlia looked up, startled. It was the cowboy from the night before, the one she had seen outside the livery stable. Up close, he was even more striking than she had realized. His face was tanned and weathered, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the edges beneath his hat. But it was his eyes that held her, those clear blue eyes that looked at her with something she had not seen in a long time. Respect. Yes, she said, her voice coming out barely above a whisper. I do not mean to intrude, he said, his voice deep and slow with a Texas drawl. But I could not help noticing that you seem troubled. Is there anything I can do to help? Dahlia felt tears prick at her eyes again, but she blinked them back. She did not want to break down in front of this stranger, this man who had no reason to care about her problems. I appreciate your concern, she said, trying to keep her voice steady, but I do not think there is anything anyone can do. He studied her for a moment, then gestured to the bench. May I sit? She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. He sat down beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. My name is Atticus Callahan, he said. I work on a ranch about 10 miles outside of town. I have been coming into Pahrump for supplies for the past few months, and I have seen you around. You always look like you are carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. Dahlia looked down at her hands. I suppose I am. My husband died 3 months ago, and I'm going to have a baby in a few months. And I have no money and nowhere to live, and no one will give me work because they think I am some kind of disgrace. The words tumbled out before she could stop them, and once she started, she could not seem to stop. The boarding house owner says I have to be out by tomorrow if I cannot pay the rent, and I do not have the money, and I do not know what I am going to do. I cannot have my baby on the street. I just cannot. She finally ran out of words and sat there, trembling, waiting for him to make some excuse and leave like everyone else had. But Atticus Callahan did not leave. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He counted out several bills and held them out to her. This should cover your rent for a few weeks, he said quietly. Dahlia stared at the money, then at him. I cannot take your money. I do not even know you. Then get to know me, he said simply. And when you are back on your feet, you can pay me back if it makes you feel better. But right now, you need help, and I can provide it. There is no shame in accepting help when you need it. Why would you do this? She asked, her voice breaking. Why would you help me? You do not know anything about me. Atticus was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. I had a sister once, he said finally. She got into trouble, and our father threw her out, said she had disgraced the family. I was just a boy then, too young to do anything to help her. She died that winter, alone and scared, because no one would give her a chance. I have regretted not being able to help her every day since. Maybe I cannot change what happened to her, but I can help you, and I aim to do just that. Dahlia felt something break open inside her chest. She took the money with shaking hands. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. I promise I will pay you back, every cent. I am not worried about it, Atticus said. He stood up and adjusted his hat. Now, about finding you some work. The ranch where I work, the Bar 7, is owned by a man named Samuel Porter. He and his wife Martha are good people, fair people. They could always use help around the house, and Martha has been saying for months that she needs someone to help with the cooking and cleaning. I could talk to them, see if they would be willing to hire you." "Do you think they would?" Dahlia asked, hardly daring to hope. "I think they would at least give you a chance," Atticus said. "That is more than most folks in this town seem willing to do. I am heading back to the ranch this afternoon. If you want, you can come with me and meet them. If they decide to hire you, there is a small cottage on the property where you could stay. It is not much, but it is clean and dry, and it would be yours." Dahlia stood up quickly, almost dizzy with relief and hope. "I would like that very much. When do we leave?" "Give me an hour to finish my business in town," Atticus said. "Meet me at the livery stable. Do you have many belongings?" "Not many," Dahlia said. "Just one bag." "That will be easy enough to carry," Atticus said. He tipped his hat to her. "I will see you in an hour, Mrs. Kennedy." "Dahlia," she said impulsively. "My name is Dahlia." He smiled, a slow, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "Dahlia," he repeated. "It is a pretty name. Fits you." Then he walked away, his spurs jingling softly, and Dahlia was left standing on the boardwalk, feeling as if the world had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. She hurried back to the boarding house and up to her room. She paid Mrs. Sullivan the rent she owed and told her she would be leaving that afternoon. Mrs. Sullivan seemed surprised but asked no questions, simply took the money and went back to her own business. Dahlia packed her few belongings into her small carpet bag, a change of clothes, her hairbrush, a few treasured items that had belonged to her mother. Everything she owned in the world fit into one small bag. It was a sobering thought, but also strangely liberating. She had nothing left to lose. An hour later, she met Atticus at the livery stable as arranged. He had a horse saddled and ready, a sturdy bay gelding with kind eyes. There was also a small wagon hitched to another horse. "I thought you might be more comfortable in the wagon," Atticus said. "It is a bit of a ride to the ranch." "Thank you," Dahlia said, deeply touched by his thoughtfulness. He helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hand strong and steady, then climbed up beside her. He took the reins and clicked his tongue, and the horse started forward at a steady walk. They rode out of Pahrump in silence, the town falling away behind them as they headed out into the open desert. The landscape was harsh and beautiful, all red rock and scrub brush and endless sky. The heat was intense, but there was a breeze that made it bearable. After a while, Atticus spoke. "Tell me about yourself, Dahlia. Where are you from originally?" "Missouri," Dahlia said. "A small town near St. Louis. I came west with my husband 2 years ago. He said there were opportunities in Nevada, that we could make a fresh start. But Thomas was not good at making fresh starts. He was good at drinking and gambling and getting into fights." "Sounds like he was not much of a husband," Atticus observed. "No," Dahlia agreed quietly. "He was not. But he was what I had. My parents died when I was 17, and I had no other family. Thomas offered me marriage and a home, and I was foolish enough to think that was the same as love. I learned differently soon enough." "I am sorry," Atticus said. "No one should have to settle for less than they deserve." "What about you?" Dahlia asked, wanting to change the subject. "Where are you from?" "Texas originally," Atticus said, "near San Antonio. I left home when I was 16 and have been working ranches ever since. I have been at the Bar 7 for about 5 years now. It is good work, and the porters treat their hands fairly. I have been foreman for the past 2 years." "You are the foreman?" Dahlia said, surprised. "That is quite an accomplishment." Atticus shrugged. "I work hard, and I care about the ranch. Samuel Porter noticed that and gave me more responsibility. I try not to let him down." They talked as they rode, and Dahlia found herself relaxing in Atticus's company. He was easy to talk to, a good listener who asked thoughtful questions and did not judge. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her parents who had run a small bakery, about the dreams she had once had of opening her own shop someday. He told her about growing up on a ranch, about learning to rope and ride before he could read, about the vast open spaces of Texas that he still missed sometimes. The sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon when they finally reached the Bar 7 ranch. It was a substantial property with a large main house, several outbuildings, a barn, and a series of corrals. Cattle dotted the landscape in the distance, and Dahlia could see several men working near the barn. Atticus drove the wagon up to the main house and helped Dahlia down. "Wait here," he said. I will go talk to Mr. and Mrs. Porter." He disappeared inside the house, and Dahlia stood in the yard, her heart pounding with nervousness. This was her last chance. If the Porters would not hire her, she did not know what she would do. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few minutes, Atticus emerged from the house, followed by a middle-aged couple. Samuel Porter was a tall, rangy man with graying hair and shrewd eyes. His wife, Martha, was a plump, motherly woman with a kind face and work-roughened hands. Martha came straight to Dahlia and took her hands. "You poor dear," she said warmly. "Atticus has told us about your situation. I want you to know that you are welcome here. We do need help around the house, and I think we could get along just fine." Dahlia felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. "Thank you," she managed to say. "Thank you so much. I promise I will work hard. You will not regret this." "I am sure we will not," Martha said, patting her hand. "Now, you look exhausted. Let me show you to the cottage where you will be staying, and you can get settled in. We will talk more about your duties tomorrow." The cottage was a small, one-room building set a short distance from the main house. It had a bed, a small table and chairs, a pot-bellied stove, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. It was simple, but clean, and to Dahlia it looked like a palace. "This is wonderful," she said, looking around. "More than I could have hoped for." "I am glad you like it," Martha said. "Atticus will bring your bag in, and I will send some supper over for you. You just rest tonight, and we will get started tomorrow." After Martha left, Atticus brought in her carpet bag and set it on the bed. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like I can breathe again," Dahlia said honestly. "I cannot thank you enough for what you have done for me." "You do not need to keep thanking me," Atticus said. "I am just glad I could help." He hesitated, then added, "If you need anything, my bunkhouse is just over there." He pointed to a long, low building past the barn. "Do not hesitate to ask." "I will not," Dahlia promised. He tipped his hat to her and left, and Dahlia sank down onto the bed, feeling the tension drain out of her body. For the first time in months, she felt safe. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and routine. Dahlia threw herself into her duties, determined to prove her worth. She helped Martha with the cooking and cleaning, tended the vegetable garden, washed and mended clothes, and did whatever else needed to be done. Martha was patient and kind, showing her the routines of the household, and never once making her feel inadequate or unwelcome. Samuel Porter was more reserved, but equally fair. He treated Dahlia with respect and paid her a fair wage for her work. She began to save every penny she earned, determined to pay back Atticus for the money he had lent her and to have something set aside for when the baby came. Atticus was a constant presence around the ranch. As foreman, he was busy from dawn to dusk, overseeing the ranch hands, managing the cattle, and handling the countless tasks that kept the Bar 7 running smoothly. But he always seemed to find time to check on Dahlia, to make sure she was settling in well and had everything she needed. At first, Dahlia was simply grateful for his kindness, but as the days turned into weeks, she found herself looking forward to those moments when he would stop by the cottage or the main house, when their paths would cross and they would exchange a few words. He had a way of making her feel seen and valued, not despite her circumstances, but simply as herself. One evening, about a month after she had arrived at the ranch, Dahlia was sitting on the small porch of her cottage, enjoying the cool air after a hot day. She was sewing a small blanket for the baby, working by the light of a lantern. She heard footsteps and looked up to see Atticus approaching. "Evening," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" "Not at all," Dahlia said, setting aside her sewing. "Please, sit down." He sat on the edge of the porch, his long legs stretched out in front of him. For a few moments they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the night, the chirping of crickets, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft whisper of the wind. "You are looking well," Atticus said finally. "Better than when I first met you." "I feel better," Dahlia said. "I cannot thank you and the Porters enough for giving me this chance. I feel like I have a future again, like maybe things are going to be all right." "They are going to be all right," Atticus said firmly. "You are strong and capable, and you are going to be a wonderful mother." Dahlia smiled, her hand moving to her belly where the baby was kicking. "I hope so. I want to give my child a good life, a safe life. I want to be enough for him or her." "You will be," Atticus said. Then, after a pause, Have you thought about what you are going to do after the baby is born? Martha will give you time to recover, of course, but eventually you will need to figure out how to care for a child and work at the same time. I know, Dahlia said, her smile fading. I have been trying not to think about it too much because it seems overwhelming. But I will figure something out. I have to. Atticus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was careful, measured. Dahlia, I have been thinking about your situation, and I have an idea. I want you to hear me out before you say anything. All right, Dahlia said, curious and a little nervous. Your baby needs a father, Atticus said bluntly. Not just for practical reasons, though those are real enough, but because every child deserves to have a name they can be proud of, a name that will open doors instead of closing them. Right now, your child will be born to a widow, and while there is nothing wrong with that, it will still be harder for both of you. People will judge, will make assumptions. I know that, Dahlia said quietly, but I do not see what I can do about it. You could marry me, Atticus said. Dahlia stared at him, certain she had misheard. What? Marry me, Atticus repeated. It would solve a lot of problems. Your child would have my name, would be recognized as legitimate by everyone. You would have the security of a husband, and I would help you raise the baby. We could build a life together. But you do not love me, Dahlia said, her voice shaking. You barely know me. Why would you want to tie yourself to someone else's problems? I know you better than you think, Atticus said. I have watched you these past weeks, seen how hard you work, how kind you are to Martha even when you are exhausted, how you never complain even though I know you must be scared. I respect you, Dahlia. I admire you, and I think we could make a good partnership. A partnership, Dahlia echoed, not a marriage based on love. Maybe not at first, Atticus admitted. But respect and friendship are a good foundation to build on, better than many marriages start with. And who knows? Maybe love will come in time. Dahlia stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, wrapping her arms around herself. Her mind was reeling. Marriage to Atticus would solve so many of her problems. Her child would have a name, a father, security. She would not have to face the world alone. But it felt wrong somehow to accept such a sacrifice from him. Why? She asked, turning to face him. Why would you really do this? I do not believe it is just because of your sister. There has to be more to it than that. Atticus stood and came to stand beside her. In the lamplight, his face was serious, his eyes searching hers. You are right. It is not just because of my sister, though that is part of it. The truth is, I have been alone for a long time, Dahlia. I have spent years drifting from one ranch to another, never putting down roots, never letting myself care too much about anything or anyone. I am 32 years old, and I am tired of being alone. When I look at you, I see someone who understands what it means to struggle, to fight for a better life. I see someone I could build something with. That is why. Dahlia felt her eyes fill with tears. You are the kindest man I have ever known, she said softly. But I cannot let you do this. It would not be fair to you. Let me decide what is fair to me, Atticus said. I am not asking you to love me, Dahlia. I am asking you to give us both a chance at something better. What do you say? Dahlia looked up at him, at this good man who was offering her everything she needed and asking for nothing in return. She thought about her child, about the life she could give her baby if she said yes. And she thought about how safe she felt when Atticus was near, how he made her laugh even when everything seemed dark, how he looked at her like she mattered. All right, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you. The relief that washed over Atticus's face was unmistakable. He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. You will not regret this, Dahlia. I promise you that. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Pahrump Community Church. Reverend Matthews performed the service, his face beaming with genuine happiness for them. Martha and Samuel Porter stood as witnesses, and a few of the ranch hands attended as well. Dahlia wore a simple blue dress that Martha had helped her make, letting out the seams to accommodate her growing belly. Atticus wore his best clothes, looking handsome and solid and real as he stood beside her at the altar. When Reverend Matthews asked if anyone objected to the union, Dahlia held her breath, half expecting someone to stand up and denounce her. But the church remained silent, and the Reverend continued with the ceremony. Do you, Atticus Callahan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part." "I do," Atticus said, his voice clear and steady. "And do you, Dahlia Kennedy, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Dahlia looked up at Atticus, at the man who had saved her when she had nowhere else to turn, and felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. "I do," she said. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Atticus hesitated for just a moment, then leaned down and kissed her gently on the lips. It was a chaste kiss, brief and respectful, but Dahlia felt it all the way to her toes. After the ceremony, they returned to the ranch where Martha had prepared a small celebration dinner. It was a simple meal, but the warmth and joy of the occasion made it feel like a feast. The ranch hands toasted the newlyweds with whiskey, and Samuel Porter gave a short speech about how lucky Atticus was to have found such a fine woman. As the evening wore on and the guests began to drift away, Dahlia found herself growing nervous. She and Atticus had not discussed the sleeping arrangements, and she was not sure what he expected from her on their wedding night. As if sensing her anxiety, Atticus came to her side and spoke quietly. "I had the hands move my things into the cottage," he said, "but I want you to know that I do not expect anything from you tonight, or any night until you are ready. This marriage is about giving you and the baby security, not about forcing you into something you do not want." The relief Dahlia felt was tempered by something else, something she could not quite name. "Thank you," she said. "I appreciate that." That night, they lay in the small bed in the cottage, a careful space between them. The bed was barely large enough for two people, and Dahlia was acutely aware of Atticus's presence beside her, the warmth of his body, the sound of his breathing. "Atticus," she said into the darkness. "Yes?" "Thank you for everything you have done for me. I know I keep saying it, but I do not know how else to express how much it means." "You do not have to thank me any more," Atticus said. "We are partners now, remember? We take care of each other." "Partners," Dahlia repeated, and somehow the word felt less hollow than it had before. The next few weeks were an adjustment period for both of them. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, figured out how to share the small space of the cottage, how to navigate the strange intimacy of being married to someone they were still getting to know. Atticus continued his work as foreman, and Dahlia continued helping Martha with the household tasks, though Martha insisted she take things easier as her pregnancy advanced. She was now 7 months along, and the baby seemed to grow larger every day. In the evenings, Atticus would return to the cottage tired and dusty from a day's work. Dahlia would have dinner ready, and they would eat together, talking about their days, sharing stories and thoughts. Slowly, tentatively, they were building something real between them. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Dahlia said, "I need to tell you something." Atticus looked at her, his expression concerned. "What is it?" "The women in town, before we were married, they said terrible things about my baby. They said he was a disgrace, that he would grow up to be nothing, that I should be ashamed." She felt tears prick at her eyes, but she forced herself to continue. "I know this baby is not yours by blood, but the fact that you are willing to give him your name, to raise him as your own, it means more to me than I can ever say. You have given my child a chance at a good life." Atticus reached over and took her hand. "This baby will bear my name, and I will love him as my own. There will be no difference in my mind between this child and any children we might have together in the future. Do you understand? This is our child now, yours and mine." Dahlia felt the tears overflow and run down her cheeks. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "I think I am the lucky one," Atticus said softly. As the days passed, Dahlia found herself falling for her husband in ways she had not expected. It was not a sudden, overwhelming passion like the poets wrote about. It was something quieter, deeper, more enduring. It was in the way he always made sure she had the most comfortable chair, the way he brought her wildflowers he had picked on the range, the way he talked to her belly and told the baby stories about the ranch. She noticed the small things about him, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness of his hands despite their calluses and strength, the patience with which he explained the workings of the ranch when she asked questions. She noticed the way the other ranch hands respected him, the way he was fair and firm with them, never asking them to do anything he would not do himself. And she noticed the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not paying attention, with an expression that was somewhere between wonder and longing. 2 months after their wedding, Dahlia went into labor. It started in the early morning hours, a dull ache in her back that gradually intensified into sharp, regular contractions. She woke Atticus, trying not to panic, and he immediately sprang into action. He rode to fetch the midwife who lived on a neighboring ranch, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, while Martha came to stay with Dahlia. The labor was long and difficult, lasting throughout the day and into the evening. Dahlia had never experienced such pain, such exhaustion, but Martha and Mrs. Henderson were there with her through it all, encouraging her, supporting her. Atticus paced outside the cottage, unable to sit still, his face drawn with worry. Every time Dahlia cried out, he flinched as if he had been struck. Samuel Porter tried to distract him with talk of ranch business, but it was clear Atticus's mind was entirely focused on the cottage and the woman suffering inside. Finally, as the sun was setting, a baby's cry split the air. Atticus froze, his heart pounding, and waited for what felt like an eternity until Martha opened the door and beckoned him inside. "Come meet your son," she said, her face glowing with joy. Atticus stepped into the cottage and saw Dahlia propped up in bed, exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the baby. The infant had a shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect features. His eyes were screwed shut, and his little fists waved in the air as he let out another indignant wail. "He is beautiful," Atticus said, his voice rough with emotion. "Absolutely beautiful." "Would you like to hold him?" Dahlia asked. Atticus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Dahlia carefully placed the baby in his arms, and Atticus looked down at the child with an expression of utter awe. This tiny, perfect human being who would carry his name, who he would raise and protect and teach. "Hello, son," he said softly. "Welcome to the world." The baby quieted at the sound of his voice, and for a moment, father and son simply looked at each other. "What should we name him?" Dahlia asked. They had discussed names over the past weeks, but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son, Atticus knew exactly what the boy's name should be. "Daniel," he said. "Daniel Callahan. It means God is my judge. I want him to grow up knowing that the only judgment that matters is his own, and God's, not the small-minded opinions of people who do not matter." "Daniel Callahan," Dahlia repeated, tasting the name. "I love it. It is perfect." Over the next few weeks, they settled into a new routine with the baby. Daniel was a good baby for the most part, though he had his fussy moments like any infant. Dahlia recovered from the birth slowly, and Atticus was there every step of the way, helping with the baby, bringing her meals, making sure she rested. Watching Atticus with Daniel was a revelation for Dahlia. He was so gentle and patient with the baby, so natural in the way he held him and soothed him. There was no hesitation, no sense that he saw the child as anything other than his own son. One night, about a month after Daniel's birth, Dahlia woke to find Atticus standing beside the cradle they had set up near the bed. He was holding Daniel and talking to him in a low voice, rocking him gently. "You are going to have a good life, little man," he was saying. "You are going to grow up strong and healthy, and you are going to know that you are loved. You are going to have opportunities, a real chance at making something of yourself. And you are never, ever going to doubt that you belong, that you are wanted. I promise you that." Dahlia felt her heart swell with love for this man who had given her and her son everything. She sat up in bed, and Atticus looked over at her. "Did we wake you?" he asked. "I am sorry," he was fussing, "and I did not want him to disturb you." "You did not wake me," Dahlia said softly. "Come back to bed." Atticus settled Daniel back in his cradle, making sure he was comfortable, then climbed back into bed beside Dahlia. They lay there in the darkness, and Dahlia reached out to take his hand. "Atticus, I need to tell you something," she said. "What is it?" "I love you," she said simply. "I do not know when it happened exactly, but somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you. You are the best man I have ever known, and I am so grateful that you came into my life." She felt Atticus go very still beside her, and for a moment she worried that she had said the wrong thing, that he did not feel the same way. But then he turned to face her, and in the dim light from the window, she could see the emotion in his eyes. "I love you too," he said, his voice thick. I think I have loved you since the day I saw you sitting outside that feed store, looking like your world was ending. I wanted to make things better for you, wanted to see you smile. And now, having you here with me, having Daniel, it is more than I ever thought I would have." He leaned in and kissed her, not the chaste kiss of their wedding day, but a real kiss, deep and passionate and full of promise. Dahlia kissed him back, pouring all of her love and gratitude and hope into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Atticus rested his forehead against hers. "I want this to be a real marriage, Dahlia, in every way. If you are ready, if you want that." "I want that," Dahlia whispered. "I want all of it. I want you." That night, they became husband and wife in truth, not just in name. And in the morning, when Daniel woke them with his hungry cries, they faced the day together as a real family. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Dahlia's life. She watched Daniel grow and change, marveling at every new development. He started to smile, then to laugh, then to reach for things with his chubby little hands. Atticus doted on him, spending every free moment playing with him, talking to him, teaching him about the world. The ranch prospered under Atticus's careful management, and Samuel Porter relied on him more and more to make important decisions. He began talking about making Atticus a partner in the ranch someday, a possibility that filled both Atticus and Dahlia with excitement. But the best moments were the quiet ones, the evenings when the three of them would sit together on the porch of their cottage, watching the sun set over the desert. Daniel would fall asleep in Atticus's arms, and Dahlia would lean against her husband's shoulder, feeling completely at peace. One day, when Daniel was about 6 months old, they decided to take a trip into Pahrump for supplies. It was the first time Dahlia had been back to town since her wedding, and she was nervous about how people would react to her. As they walked down the main street, pushing Daniel in a small pram that Atticus had built, Dahlia was acutely aware of the stares they were attracting. She recognized some of the faces, including Mrs. Whitmore and Mrs. Davidson, the women who had called her baby a disgrace. Mrs. Whitmore approached them, her face arranged in what was probably meant to be a friendly expression. "Mrs. Callahan," she said, "how lovely to see you, and what a beautiful baby." "Thank you," Dahlia said coolly, not forgetting the cruel words this woman had spoken. "You must be so happy," Mrs. Whitmore continued, peering into the pram. "A husband, a baby, a home. You have done quite well for yourself." "I have been very blessed," Dahlia agreed, her hand tightening on the pram handle. Mrs. Whitmore opened her mouth to say something else, but Atticus stepped forward, his expression polite but firm. "If you will excuse us, madam, we have business to attend to." He guided Dahlia away, and she could feel the tension draining from her shoulders. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You never have to thank me for protecting my family," Atticus said. "Those women have no power over you anymore, Dahlia. You are respected now, a rancher's wife with a fine son and a good life. Let them whisper if they want. It does not matter." And it did not matter, Dahlia realized. She had everything that truly counted, a man who loved her, a healthy child, and a future full of promise. As they completed their errands and prepared to head back to the ranch, they ran into Reverend Matthews. His face lit up when he saw them. "Mr. and Mrs. Callahan," he said warmly. "And young Daniel, what a joy to see you all looking so well." "Thank you, Reverend," Atticus said. "We are doing very well indeed." "I am so glad," Reverend Matthews said. "You know, I always believed that things would work out for you, Dahlia. God has a way of bringing the right people together at the right time. You two are proof of that." As they rode back to the ranch that afternoon, Daniel sleeping peacefully in Dahlia's arms, she reflected on how much her life had changed in less than a year. She had gone from being alone and desperate to being surrounded by love and security. And it was all because of the cowboy who had seen past her circumstances to the person she really was. The years passed peacefully at the Bar 7 ranch. Daniel grew into a bright, energetic little boy, with his mother's green eyes and his father's serious demeanor. Atticus taught him to ride, to rope, to work with the cattle. He was patient and loving, and Daniel adored him completely. When Daniel was 3 years old, Dahlia discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was joyful from the start, free from the fear and shame that had colored her first. Atticus was thrilled, and Daniel, when they told him he was going to be a big brother, was excited beyond measure. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1877, a healthy baby girl with Atticus's blue eyes and Dahlia's dark hair. They named her Sarah after Atticus's mother, and she completed their family perfectly. Samuel Porter made good on his promise and made Atticus a partner in the ranch, giving him a percentage of the profits and a real stake in its future. They expanded the cottage into a real house with separate bedrooms for the children and a large kitchen, where Dahlia could cook and bake to her heart's content. Life was not always easy. There were droughts and hard winters, sick cattle, and difficult deliveries. But they faced every challenge together, supporting each other, drawing strength from their love and their faith in each other. Daniel grew into a fine young man, strong and capable like his father. He never questioned that Atticus was his real father in every way that mattered. Atticus had given him his name, his love, and his guidance, and that was more than enough. Sarah grew into a spirited, independent young woman who could ride and rope as well as any ranch hand. She had her mother's kindness and her father's steady determination. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Atticus and Dahlia stood on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the desert. The children were inside, Daniel helping Sarah with her schoolwork, their voices drifting out through the open window. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Atticus asked, his arm around Dahlia's waist. "If I had not seen you that day in town, if I had just ridden on by?" "I try not to," Dahlia said honestly. "It frightens me to think about it. I do not know what would have happened to me and Daniel if you had not stopped to help." "Well, I did stop," Atticus said firmly, "and I would make the same choice 1,000 times over. You and our children are the best thing that ever happened to me, Dahlia." "You saved us," Dahlia said softly. "When those women said my baby was a disgrace, when the whole world seemed to be against us, you gave us your name and your love. You gave us everything. And you gave me a family," Atticus said, "a home, a reason to put down roots and build something lasting. We saved each other, Dahlia." She reached up and kissed him, pouring a decade of love and gratitude into that kiss. When they broke apart, both smiling, they heard Daniel call from inside. "Mama, Papa, supper is ready." They went inside together, to the warm, welcoming home they had built, to the children they loved more than life itself, to the life they had created together out of desperate circumstances and steadfast love. As they sat around the table, saying grace before the meal, Dahlia looked at the faces of her family and felt her heart overflow with happiness. Daniel, who bore Atticus's name with pride and had never once been made to feel like anything less than a true Callahan. Sarah, who had been welcomed into the world with joy and celebration. And Atticus, the cowboy who had stopped to help a desperate woman and had ended up finding the love of his life. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Atticus and Dahlia lay in their bed, talking quietly in the darkness. "I was thinking," Atticus said, "that we should think about expanding the house again. Add on another room or two." "Why?" Dahlia asked, though she thought she knew. "Well, if we are going to have more children, we will need the space," Atticus said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "More children?" Dahlia said, laughing softly. "Are 2 not enough for you?" "I would be happy with however many we are blessed with," Atticus said. "But I will admit, I like the idea of a house full of children, of noise and laughter and life." "Then we will see what God has in store for us," Dahlia said, snuggling closer to her husband. "Whatever it is, we will face it together." 2 years later, they welcomed twin boys into the world, Jacob and Joshua. The house was indeed full of noise and laughter and life, and both Dahlia and Atticus thrived on it. The ranch continued to prosper. Samuel and Martha Porter eventually retired and moved to California to be near Martha's sister, leaving the ranch entirely in Atticus's capable hands. He renamed it the Callahan Ranch, and it became known throughout Nevada as one of the best-run and most successful cattle operations in the territory. Daniel grew up and married a lovely young woman named Elizabeth from a neighboring ranch. They settled nearby and gave Dahlia and Atticus their first grandchildren. Sarah eventually married as well to a school teacher who moved to Pahrump and opened the town's first proper school. The twins, Jacob and Joshua, stayed on the ranch working alongside their father and eldest brother, ensuring that the Callahan legacy would continue for generations. On a cool evening in the autumn of 1895, Dahlia and Atticus sat on the porch of their home, now expanded into a sprawling ranch house that could accommodate their large and growing family. They were both in their 50s now, their hair touched with gray, their faces lined with years of hard work and laughter. 22 years, Dahlia said, shaking her head in wonder. Can you believe it has been 22 years since we married? Best 22 years of my life, Atticus said, taking her hand. Though I have to say, I am grateful that all the children are finally old enough that we do not have to worry about midnight feedings anymore. Dahlia laughed. We have 8 grandchildren to make up for it. I swear little Emma keeps her parents up all night with her crying. She is spirited, like her grandmother, Atticus said fondly. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. In the distance, they could see Daniel and Jacob working with some of the newer ranch hands, teaching them the ropes. Joshua was in the barn, tending to a mare that was about to foal. Sarah and her family were coming to visit tomorrow, and the house would once again be filled with the sound of children playing and family gathered together. Atticus, Dahlia said softly. Yes, love? Do you remember what you said to me that night you proposed, about how respect and friendship were a good foundation to build on, and that maybe love would come in time? I remember, Atticus said. You were right, Dahlia said, but I think we got lucky. Love did not just come in time. It grew and deepened and became something more beautiful than I ever could have imagined. Every single day, I love you more than the day before. Atticus turned to her, his blue eyes still as clear and bright as the day she had first seen him outside the livery stable. I feel the same way, Dahlia. You are my partner, my best friend, the love of my life, the mother of my children. You are everything to me. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that held 22 years of shared joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle, laughter and tears. A kiss that promised many more years to come. When they finally pulled apart, they heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. A rider was coming up the long drive to the house, and as he got closer, they recognized him as one of the men from town. Mr. Callahan, the man called as he dismounted. I have a telegram for you. It just came in. Atticus took the telegram and thanked the man, who remounted and rode back toward town. He opened the telegram and read it, his expression shifting to surprise and then to pleasure. What is it? Dahlia asked. It is from the territorial governor, Atticus said, showing her the telegram. He wants to appoint me to the Nevada Territorial Livestock Commission. It is a position that oversees cattle ranching throughout the territory, helps set standards and regulations, represents the interests of ranchers to the government. Atticus, that is wonderful, Dahlia said, genuinely excited for him. You would be perfect for that role. It would mean traveling sometimes, Atticus said thoughtfully. Going to Carson City for meetings, visiting other ranches. But the boys are more than capable of running things here when I am gone. What do you think? Should I accept? Of course you should accept, Dahlia said firmly. You have worked your whole life for this, for recognition and respect and the chance to make a real difference. You should absolutely do it. Atticus smiled and pulled her close. Then I will. But only if you promise to come with me sometimes when I travel. I do not like the idea of being away from you for too long. I would love to travel with you, Dahlia said. It would be an adventure. And so began a new chapter in their lives. Atticus accepted the position on the Livestock Commission and threw himself into the work with his characteristic dedication and integrity. He became known throughout Nevada Territory as a fair and knowledgeable advocate for ranchers, someone who understood both the practical realities of the business and the need for sustainable practices. Dahlia sometimes accompanied him on his trips, and they enjoyed seeing new places and meeting new people together. But they always looked forward to coming home, to the ranch and the family that had grown from such humble and desperate beginnings. The years continued to pass, bringing changes both large and small. Nevada achieved statehood, though it had actually happened back in 1864, before Dahlia had even arrived in the territory. The country grew and changed around them, new technologies and ideas transforming the West. But through it all, the Callahan Ranch remained a constant, a place of hard work and strong values and deep love. Daniel took over more and more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch as Atticus spent more time with the Livestock Commission. He proved to be as capable a manager as his father, and the ranch continued to thrive under his leadership. The twins, Jacob and Joshua, were his invaluable partners, each bringing their own strengths to the business. Sarah's husband became a prominent figure in Pahrump, his school educating a new generation of children and helping the town grow from a dusty outpost to a real community. Sarah herself became known for her charity work, helping families in need and never forgetting what her own mother had endured. On a summer evening in 1903, the entire Callahan family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. It was Atticus and Dahlia's 30th wedding anniversary, and their children had organized a large party in their honor. The yard was filled with tables laden with food, lanterns strung up to provide light as the sun set, and dozens of friends and family members who had come to honor the couple. Atticus and Dahlia stood together as Daniel offered a toast. His own children gathered around him. "To my parents," Daniel said, raising his glass. "To the man who gave me his name when the world said I was not worthy of one. And to the woman who never gave up even when everything seemed hopeless. You taught me what it means to be strong, to be kind, to stand up for what is right. You taught me that family is not always about blood, but about love and commitment and choosing to show up for each other every single day. I am the man I am because of you, and I will be forever grateful." There was not a dry eye in the crowd as Daniel finished his toast. Dahlia was openly crying, and even Atticus had to wipe his eyes discreetly. Their other children followed with their own toasts, each one expressing their love and gratitude in their own way. Finally, Atticus stood to respond. He looked out at the assembled crowd, at the family he and Dahlia had built together, and felt overwhelmed with emotion. 30 years ago, he said, his voice strong despite his emotion, I met a woman sitting outside a feed store in Pahrump. She was alone and scared and carrying a child, and the world had turned its back on her. I could have walked away. Maybe I should have walked away, but something in her eyes, some spark of strength and determination, made me stop, made me want to help. I asked her to marry me, to let me give her child my name and a chance at a good life, and she said yes. He turned to Dahlia, taking her hand. What I did not know then, what I could not have known, was that I was not saving her. She was saving me. From a life of loneliness and drift, from never knowing what it meant to truly love someone with your whole heart. She gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to be the best man I could be. Every day with her has been a gift, every child a blessing, every challenge an opportunity to grow stronger together. He raised his glass. To my wife Dahlia, the bravest, strongest, most loving woman I have ever known. Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for 30 years of love and laughter and partnership. I love you more than words can say. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Atticus pulled Dahlia close and kissed her, not caring that everyone was watching. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying, their children and grandchildren surrounded them, hugging them, celebrating them, showing them the love that they had so generously given coming back to them 100-fold. As the party continued into the night, with music and dancing and stories told and retold, Dahlia found a quiet moment to slip away from the crowd. She walked to the edge of the yard and looked out over the ranch, at the life she and Atticus had built together. She thought about that desperate woman she had been 30 years ago, crying in a boarding house room, convinced her baby would grow up bearing the shame of circumstances beyond his control. She thought about the cowboy who had offered her everything with no expectation of anything in return. And she thought about the family they had created, proof that love and determination and faith could overcome any obstacle. She felt Atticus come up behind her and wrap his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. They stood there together, looking out at their legacy, at the ranch that bore their name, and the family that would carry it forward for generations to come. "What are you thinking about?" Atticus asked softly. "I am thinking about how grateful I am," Dahlia said. "For you, for our children, for this life. I am thinking about how that day you found me was the luckiest day of my life." "Mine too," Atticus said, kissing the top of her head. "Mine too." They stood there in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the sounds of their family celebrating behind them, and Dahlia knew with absolute certainty that she had found her happily ever after. Not because life had been easy, not because they had never faced challenges or heartbreak, but because she had found a partner who would stand beside her through anything, a man who had looked at a desperate woman with a fatherless child and said, "Then he will bear my name." And that had made all the difference. Years later, when Dahlia and Atticus were both old and gray, Sitting on the porch of the ranch house, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, they would tell the story of how they met. They would talk about the hard times and the good times, about the struggles they had faced and the triumphs they had achieved. And Daniel, the son whose birth had been called a disgrace, would sit with his own grandchildren on his knee and tell them about the cowboy who had given him a name and a future. He would tell them about courage and kindness and the power of choosing to love, even when it would be easier to walk away. The Callahan Ranch prospered for generations, becoming one of the most respected operations in Nevada. But more than that, it became a symbol of what could be built when two people committed to facing life together, when love and respect formed the foundation of a family. Dahlia lived to see her 82nd birthday, surrounded by a family so large that the ranch house could barely contain them all. Atticus was by her side until the end, holding her hand, telling her how much he loved her, thanking her for the life they had shared. When she passed peacefully in her sleep, the entire community mourned. The funeral was one of the largest Pahrump had ever seen, with people coming from all over Nevada to pay their respects to the woman who had overcome such adversity to build such a remarkable legacy. Atticus followed her 3 years later, his heart simply giving out one morning as he sat on the porch watching the sunrise. His children found him there, peaceful and smiling, and they knew he had gone to be with the woman he had loved for more than 50 years. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple headstone that read, Atticus and Dahlia Callahan, partners, parents, proof that love can conquer all. And if you visit the Callahan Ranch today, now run by the 5th generation of the family, you can still hear the stories. Stories about a desperate woman and a kind cowboy, about a baby who was called a disgrace but grew up to be a pillar of his community, about a love that started as a practical arrangement and grew into something legendary. The ranch still stands, testament to what can be built when two people refuse to give up, when they choose love over judgment, hope over despair, partnership over loneliness. And in the family Bible, carefully preserved and passed down through the generations, you can still read the entry made in 1873. Atticus Callahan and Dahlia Kennedy married this day. Daniel Kennedy Callahan, born 3 months later, our beloved son. No mention of disgrace, no hint of shame. Just a family bound together by love and the courage it took to choose each other when the world said they should not. And that, in the end, is the only legacy that truly matters.